Hello everyone, welcome back to the Dylan and Andrew show, where we are a couple of loose cannons talking about a couple things. Today, we have a very special topic for you. A topic near and dear to Dylan's heart, where if you know him, he's probably told you about it. He's probably trapped you in a room and talked about it to you for quite some time. And this is the topic of objective versus subjective morality. So, I'll define those things before we get started. Morality, my understanding of what the word morality means, is it's a set of uh, perhaps rules or principles or a governing body of ideas, if you will, that regulates the way that a person or maybe a group of people uh, behave in given situations. Um, and objective versus subjective. Uh, Objective meaning that something is true. It is true regardless of somebody's opinion on it. Um, it's something that's immutable or unchanging, and uh, yeah, it exists absolutely. Whereas a subjective thing would be something that changes based on your opinion, based on the situation, based on your perception or your experience. So it's this idea of, with morality, are moral ideas objectively true, meaning that they do not change regardless of our opinion on the matter or our experiences. They are just set in stone, and um, they have been the same since the yesterday, and they will be the same tomorrow. Or is morality subjective? Is it subject to change based on our culture, or on our experiences, or based on our situation? So that's what our topic is today. So
It's a
Dylan,
fun one.
it is a fun one. What's your initial thoughts as we come into this?
Yeah, I like how you define them. I guess the only thing I would add to the moral definition of morality is just to simplify it and say, um, what is deemed right versus wrong.
Mm. Yes, that's. I think that's a
Um,
good kind of boiling down there.
so, I mean, uh, one of the largest questions of that philosophy asks, especially epistemology, is what is truth? And again, like morality being objective or subjective, you have to think about what is truth because you don't want to be morally allowing something if it is truly wrong.
Mm.
So then you have to you start asking the questions. Well, how do I know what do I know, and how do I know it to be wrong,
Mm.
and how do I live virtuously through it? So um, just taking a step forward in this conversation. Would there be an issue, or can you think of a time in your life, Andrew, where you've seen um, this issue like directly in front of you, or been a part of any conversations where this has been specifically talked about?
Yeah, I mean, I think in my experience, I went to school at University of Alberta. Uh, took engineering there, so science. But there's a lot of University of Alberta is a place of very, um, I'll say, progressive, liberal thought. Um, and one of the big opinions that a lot of people held there, a lot of people that I knew quite well, was that truth, even as it's interesting that you bring up that idea of truth, because it's true that truth and morality go hand in hand here with that conversation of objective versus subjectivity. But basically, it's a fairly wide held idea, at least in my experience with the people that I had interacted with, that truth is actually subjective because, you know, uh, I had a long conversation, not super long. I had a conversation with a friend about this several times, and basically my understanding of what she was telling me was basically that truth is subjective because we are emotional beings, we're irrational beings to an extent, and we can only perceive facts from our limited perspective. So therefore, it's impossible to come to a actually objective view on anything. So therefore, all truth is subjective because we can't actually make any objective uh, statements.
Hmm.
Maybe I guess beyond that objective statement.
Yeah,
That was my understanding, at least, of what she was saying.
yeah.
Um,
And
yeah.
I mean, I think to kind of lay a base work, because I know obviously we are going to different schools right now. I'm going to school to be a pastor, so obviously I have a different realm of expertise than you. But I would just say like to lay a foundation for the way that most universities have been set up over the last however many years that they've been institutionalized. Um, most universities in North America started as Christian universities of higher
Huh.
education.
Interesting.
Um, but there was obviously with science growing around the end of the 19th century and then going into the 20th century, and with great human advances, especially pushed by the world wars, many people were looking for the answers not from a divine perspective, but from a humanly perspective. And one of the movements in church history that came about because of this was actually the modernism movement. And I don't know, you've probably heard of the postmodern
Hmm.
ideology, but now this modernist movement, and I'm going to just paraphrase parts of what I've heard and studied about the movement. But
Okay.
uh, basically, um, the modernist movement started as an attempt to um, explain modern science while still upholding Orthodox Christianity, which I mean
Okay.
sounds pretty good on the surface. However, they completely disregarded anything divine in nature. So, for example, Jesus's um, virgin birth, they discarded that as mythological, as
Mm.
well as his resurrection. And two of the key fundamental points of Christianity is Jesus' virgin birth and resurrection. I mean,
So they
even
were kind of
Paul.
discarding the supernatural aspects of the Christian faith.
Exactly, yeah. They're saying, everything Christianity isn't actually more of a historical belief as it is a philosophical one.
Interesting.
And so, from this modernist movement, obviously, you can see where that goes. If you just start discarding biblical truths, then you end up not biblical at all. And
Right.
so, what ends up happening is this progressive, like as you said, this progressive thought comes where, okay, well, maybe if the virgin birth and the resurrection aren't right, then maybe this isn't right. And then so people start saying, okay, maybe this isn't right, this isn't right. And then eventually it goes from agnosticism to atheism,
Mm.
and then people are lost because they're saying there's no objective standard anymore, and that objective standard which started all of these universities was Christianity, was the moral law in the uh, Hebrew Bible, in the Old Testament. So
Yeah, it's
I
very
mean,
interesting that you mentioned that these institutions started as Christian because, in my experience, you know, there's a engineering um, ceremony when you graduate. It's called the Iron Ring ceremony, and there was actually, I mean, it's a very traditional ceremony. It's kind of almost a relic, if you will, from the old world. But I noticed that there was a lot of actually Christian themes in it. um, which was surprising to me because my whole experience in my university career was just this constant, again, quote unquote, progressive narrative of we're the bleeding edge of history. We're discarding religion. We're moving past that antiquated idea, and now we're coming into this golden age of science and discovery, where we're gonna solve all the world's problems with knowledge, right? And this is this kind of interstellar idea almost. I've watched
Mm,
that movie recently, and it felt like almost a very religious experience to me, meaning that science was and knowledge even was the objective truth and was the perfect state of humanity that we're striving for.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. And I mean,
so yeah,
it's interesting. It's interesting also that you. I'm kind of curious as to what some of these ceremonies were. So I'll ask you about them after I say this. But
okay,
it's kind of interesting how you say um, science is this objective truth when science doesn't actually tell you um, why things happen. It tells you how they happen.
mm,
And so people have stopped asking why or what or who and started asking how.
so it's
And
taking the meaning out of it. It's just talking about the mechanics.
basically is that's what the modernism movement even laid the groundwork for postmodern thought, and that's why our world and especially Western culture is so subjective in their thinking today. And I
Right.
mean that's not to say that subjective reality has doesn't have existence. I mean we all live with different experiences. However, if we all look at a glass of water and say, there's water in this glass, but then somebody says, well, actually, there's more air in the glass than water. That still doesn't take away from the truth that there is water in the glass,
Mm,
regardless of how full the glass is. There's still water in the glass, and so someone's opinion of the water being in the glass has no necessary truth value to it. You're just making a subjective statement based out of your own opinion.
mm,
And that's not to say that your opinion is wrong either, it's just different. So, yeah, you can have a subjective opinion about an objective truth.
right.
And whether your subjective opinion is wrong or not is based on what we call virtue. And this is where we're getting into the area of ethics and morality.
Okay.
So, anyways, back to um, what were some of these ceremonies that you experienced?
Well, so the main ceremony being again the um, Iron Ring ceremony was now if you're familiar at all with engineering at the U of A and in Canada really it's it's the joke is that it's a big cult, and because we're told to keep secret about it, not to tell um, not to tell everyone what happens at the uh, uh, ceremony, but whatever. Uh, so, but basically, it was this. Um, Everyone was standing together in this big open room, and there's these engineers up at the front, and they take a hammer and they bang some steel um, in Morse code for 3 letters. I can't remember what the letters were, but they had some meaning. And then they read um, this this poem written by what's his name? It was actually the guy who wrote the Jungle Book. I'm looking it up right now. Um, the original book. Uh, 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 Original. Looking it up for you because this is a fun fact. Uh, uh, what's his name? Rudyard Kipling is apparently his name. Yes, Kipling is the last name that I recognize. So there you go. This guy, Mr. Kipling, um, a famous author, wrote the Jungle Book. He wrote this kind of poem for the convocation of the engineer, as it were. Um, and it has a lot of references to a bunch of Catholic doctrines. It references the Apocrypha, some of the books that we Christians don't think are canon. Well, sorry, we Protestants don't think are canon, and Catholics do. Um, but it was basically this whole poem and set of statements, basically saying that in our work as engineers, we will honor each other. We will have respect for others. We will treat everyone with fairness. We will take our wages because we have earned them, and we will do all this in the sight of God, basically. And you know, to honor the calling that we have received by undergoing the education that we underwent. So it was this really interesting and, as we're talking about here, moral ceremony, basically saying, hey, your community and God Himself is watching you, so behave in a worthy manner as you have this great responsibility. Because I mean, for me, I'm a computer engineer, so you can we can tend to joke about how we're not quite as working with quite as high stakes as maybe a civil engineer building a bridge or mechanical engineer designing a car that someone's going to be driving in. But I mean, certainly software can be very dangerous, especially now with the rise of artificial intelligence and how our whole lives are online now. So digital
Yeah.
security is very important. But that being said, as engineers, these where we have a very serious responsibility to perform our work in a way that is safe and guards the public interest. And they actually called us to do that, not out of some naturalistic or um, even practical uh, um, uh, set of ideas, but they straight up came at you with this moral and even biblical approach of, hey, like it is it is right for you to behave in this way. It's not just optimal, or it's not just a good idea, or it's not just most profitable, but it is right for you to behave in such a way that you treat others with fairness, you protect the public safety, and
Mm.
you take your wages fairly earned. So to me, that was so interesting because this whole time in my education, I'm getting this underlying message of you know science is the way, and this is how we progress, and yeah, just morality and especially biblical or religious ideas are quite old and antiquated, and yet here I am at the end of my education, about to move into the professional world, and that's how they send us off. So it was just a very interesting experience for sure.
Hmm. Yeah. And I mean, uh, I guess from there, yeah, that I mean, like, how do you even how do you even balance that? Like, if I wasn't a Christian, I wouldn't even know how to even deal with the situation like that. I mean, like, if I'm holding to my own subjective truth and subjective morality, how can they tell me what is right or wrong?
Mm.
Um, and if I so choose to do whatever with whatever the education they have given me, isn't that my own subjective morality speaking? Which is just entirely false, as we both know. But uh, like you can't if they're teaching subjective morality. You said this to me earlier in the night. If you're or you said this to somebody, it was actually great. I was so proud of you. Um, But it was like you can't if you don't hold to an objective standard of living, and you are truly and merely um, writing your own morals or ethics, living by your own subjective truth, then you cannot hold other people accountable to your subjective truth
Mm,
because they are living their own subjective truth. So, if in your situation, um, if somebody is living in that manner, um, there's nobody that can say this is right and this is wrong. I'm
mm.
strictly living by what I deem right and wrong. And
Yep.
there's no point in deeming anything right or wrong unless there is a God.
Yeah.
Because
This
who,
is
yeah,
like in Mere Christianity, which I've been rereading lately. Um, that's the same exact thing C.S. Lewis says, where he is, in his experience, right? He's lived through the world wars. He's talking about the Nazis, and he's saying, okay, well, if there is no objective, true moral standard, then we may have still had to fight the Nazis because they were a threat to us, but we would have no right to say that what they were doing was was bad, or no right to judge them for what they were doing any more than we have the right to judge them for the color of their hair, is the phrase he used. Um, so if there is no, because that's the reason, right? That especially nowadays with all this resurgence of in politics, uh, the neo-Nazi movement in some circles. Why is that so abhorrent, right? If you're saying to them like you're a Nazi, you're evil, well, why is a Nazi evil? Because they're offensive to these base principles that you believe everyone should agree on, right? Um,
mm,
and if you don't agree on that, that immediately is an evil thing. And you know, there is not really a way to justify the idea that something is evil just because it's
yeah,
evil, unless there is some external supernatural thing that is setting that standard, which in this case we
mm,
call God, right?
yeah. And if you're calling something or someone evil, you're also implying that there is the opposite as well. Like you can't imply that there is pure goodness without also implying that there is the opposite.
Mm,
Because with good comes bad. Because by what do you define good by? And by you said speaking of people who accuse neo Nazis of being evil, you said that uh, there was these base principles in which each person has, and C.S. Lewis, we're probably going to refer to him
yep.
quite a bit in this thing because he writes a lot about it in Mere Christianity, and then he writes a full book about it, which I'm reading right now called The Abolition of Man, basically depicting how when we start to lose objective standards,
Mm.
then society just crumbles. But that's we'll see where we're at in 20 years. Um, but back to what you said, it's like there's this base standard by which people are judging evil, and where are they getting that base standard? All of your moral decisions are based off of something else, because there's no way that you could say from birth that stealing is wrong. There's no way you could say something like that is wrong. Like obviously, maybe we have a natural law of hurting other people is wrong, but if it profits you, and then even babies like they're you hold something out in front of their face, and what do? They go gimme, and they try to snatch it out of your hand. And I mean,
Mm.
if that's not human depravity, which is just
Mhm.
like instilled in us from birth, a natural depravity, then like what do we really do?
Mm.
Um, and so
And
anyway,
there's this. I've had an interesting conversation a while ago with my we call her and them uh, aunt, uncle, but they're technically I think are or my like second or third cousin or something, but they're much older than me. I don't know. But I was having this conversation about morality, about objective, subjective morality, and what that looks like. And uh, they were coming at me with this idea that, okay, sure, like there's some objective standard of morality, but um, you know, why does it have to come from God, right? Why can't it just be the idea that we want to preserve life or we want to protect people, right? Like, this is wrong because it hurts people, right? That's kind of what the idea that they were coming at me with. But what I said to them is, okay, so why should I value life, right? Or why? And then they're like, okay, well, you should value life because, um, that allows humans to prosper. And I'm like, okay, why should I value human prosperity? And they're like, well, because, you know, if humans prosper, then life continues, and we can have happiness, we can have joy. I'm like, great, okay. Why should I value happiness or joy? Because even though, sure, like obviously, it's kind of seems like a dumb question to ask. Why should I value happiness? Because being happy is a lot of fun. But on a moral level, why should we make a human prosperity or allowing people to be happy? Why should we make that a goal for ourselves, right? Um,
Mm.
or maybe not why, but how can we justify that as a standard that everyone should follow? Because you could say, why should we do that? Because I like doing it. Fair enough. But how can we say this is an objective moral standard that you should follow? And we can't really, right? Unless an
Mm.
external force greater than us has defined this standard, and everyone um, has this moral law written on their hearts, right? Or as the Bible would say, because this is what C.S. Lewis touches on as well, is that um, you know all the different cultures across the world actually have quite remarkably similar values to each other. Sure, some uh, because he gives examples like some cultures would say you should have one wife, some would say you could have more than one, but none of them say that you can have any person that you like. Um, you know, some you'll never find a culture that does not value justice or thinks that murder or dishonor or uh, uh, other types of depraved, if you will, behavior. No one thinks that that is morally good. Maybe they might say it's okay in some scenarios or it happens for XYZ reason, but you'll never find a culture that proliferates the idea that these things are actually just or upright, uh, right?
Yep. Yep. And I mean, that just goes with, the 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 natural law that C.S. Lewis speaks about in Mere Christianity. Um, it's this idea that's instilled in us that, yeah, we have this longing for a higher sense of longing. We have a longing for a higher sense of meaning and morality. Yet it's almost like we try to find it anywhere except with the explanation of God.
Mm.
Um, and so, you know, with uh, the subjective nature of our culture today, and with everybody saying, well, actually, no, my truth is my truth, and it's the way that I've abided for so and so for X amount of years, and it's worked
Mm-hmm.
for me. Um, well, your truth uh, isn't actually the truth because truth by definition is exclusive, and meaning you can't. No one you can't have individual truths, and you can't and claim that it is, you know, correct. It's
Right.
your opinion based off of a greater objective truth that is true. Um, but to say that there are multiple mini truths is just philosophically and you know wrong,
Right.
philosophically and intellectually wrong.
Yeah. You love
Um,
to say you love to talk about the law of non-contradiction, right? That two true things cannot contradict each other. Is that a that's a correct summation of that?
yes.
So, if in the subjective idea of truth, one person thinks something is true, and they're like, "This is my truth," and then another person thinks something else is true, and they say, "This is my truth," and then if these two truths are contradictory, um, then the, then it stands to reason that one or both of them are actually not true, right?
hmm
So
I
truth,
actually want to. Sorry, I want to figure out the law of non-contradiction because I'm kind of tripping right now. Keep going.
yeah, what I was going to say is that truth must necessarily, by definition, or at least my understanding of the definition of truth, um, be true regardless of any external factors, right? And again, there's this idea, sure, that you can be looking at something from a different angle or be saying different things about something and them both be true, like a cup of water that's half full. You can say, this cup contains water. Someone else could say, no, this cup contains air, and both of them be true. But at the same time, you couldn't have someone say, this cup is 100% water, and somebody else say, this cup is, you know, only air. Um, those two statements can't coexist because there is an actual objective, absolute truth behind both of those statements, right? Even if,
hmm
sure, you can't see part of it if you think it's only air, you can only see the water. But there is still, even if you can't see it, an absolute truth behind these things that is actually governing, if you will, the state of the world.
hmm And I mean, yeah, just heavily, the laws of logic, how we that we've developed, um, you know, philosophically, which it also fascinates me because even most of the Middle Ages, as well as Renaissance and Enlightenment thinkers, who developed most of the philosophical understandings that we have today, and most of the um, you know orders of reason and rationale, and are were Christian. So
Mm-hmm.
most of the philosophical thought that we have today are expansions off of Greek philosophies that are so heavily entwined within the uh, Christian teachings and moral code that it explains like this this subject uh, gets me going, but I don't want to pop off and seem like, you know, I could pop off, and I mean you've heard me pop off, but
Have.
um, yeah, like uh, it's uh, it's just when you are constantly surrounded by this, whether it be culture, people, even your family, and it's just you bring forth logic and reason, um, and you gently explain these things, and yet um, it seems like it takes no ground or it doesn't have any friction. It can
Hmm.
be it can be quite difficult. So I guess just uh, a wise man once told me um, that if you are in the process of evangelism, because that's basically what you're also doing when you're talking about subjective and objective truth, is you're trying to conform the thinking. I don't like using that word conform, but I think it's a pretty good
Hmm.
description right now. You're conforming someone's thought using logic and reason to that of, okay, there is an objective standard. What is that objective standard, which we know to be God? Um, that process in and of itself is evangelism because it gets the people, it gets whoever you're speaking to thinking of like a higher purpose and a higher rationale as to what life is about.
Hmm.
So, uh, you know, like I said, once this wise man once told me that if somebody is at a 0 out of 10 for accepting Christ as their savior, your job is not to get them from a 0 to a 10 because that's an unrealistic expectation. Maybe even a 0 to a 5 is an unreal expectation, depending on that person's heart posture and depending on the work that the Holy Spirit has done in them previously,
Hmm.
or not. So your goal is not to get them from from obviously you're not being lazy in this process. You're working hard both intellectually and physically. Loving in deed and in truth. Um,
Hmm.
while still, you know, explaining what these things mean. And yeah, I keep drifting off in my thought, but this wise man once told me, your job is not to get them from 0 to 10; it's to get them from from zero to maybe 0.1.
Huh. Yeah.
So, I mean, if this conversation can get at least one person from zero point 0 to 0.1, I think it's worth it. And I
Totally.
mean, um, for more resources, yeah, definitely check out C.S. Lewis. He writes a lot on this.
He does.
Um, and there's a few other metaphysical writers who write a lot on this, like Rene Descartes and Immanuel Kant. Those are two Enlightenment thinkers who actually pretty much wrote. Um, they wrote the framework, um, the foundation for metaphysics and epistemology, which is
Hmm.
the study of being and the study of truth and knowledge. So
Cool. Well,
yeah,
we're
yeah,
coming up on uh, 37 minutes now, 38, so we're getting there. But
yeah.
I'll close with, or at least I'll close my own thoughts with another Mere Christianity ripoff, where I loved what C.S. Lewis basically talked about, as you said, this idea of the natural law, and how moral laws are not just true um, because they're true and you better follow them or else, uh, but rather they're the natural state of, or rather maybe the ideal state of the human experience. And following these objective moral laws is not just an act of suppressing the desires you have and draining out all the life out of everything, but they're actually the best and the truest way um, to live your life, and they're actually the ideal expression of the human experiment, if you will. Um, it's yeah, I just love that idea from C.S.
Yeah.
Lewis that these following these things is not something that drains life from you, but actually allows you to live your life in the way it was meant to be lived. But any closing thoughts from you, Dylan?
Mm, yeah. Um, and I'm gonna rip off a little bit of Abolition of Man here by C.S. Lewis as well. Um, I mean, he writes his first chapter in that book based off of in reflection to another book. And I've only read the first chapter so far, so I can't speak on any of the other chapters. So it might go further in depth on this book, but he calls this book, I think, the Green Book or something like that. And he actually says this is it promotes this relative subjective mindset within higher education.
Hmm.
Um, so it's kind of funny, like you're taught at these higher education colleges, which are or universities, which are quite progressive, quite liberal in their thinking. You're taught this, and it's actually just so intertwined into the fabric and network of the thinking of the school that it's not even spoken about anymore. Like the philosophy of subjectivity, of truth and morals isn't even spoken about yet. It's so uh, deep seated and so rooted in some of the teachings there,
Hmm.
um, that it's kind of hard to it can be kind of hard to navigate when you're not purposefully thinking about it later on in life. And I mean, even as critically thinking individuals and people who engage with culture and um, critically evaluate what they consume, whether it be um, through audio, visual, and or uh, edible. you 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 are going to find a lot of um, inconsistencies within a subjective morality and a subjective truth,
Hmm.
which uh, you need to critically evaluate for yourself. So, yeah, and that's it. It's kind of late. I think we should have probably, you know, done this before we gamed, but
Well,
probably would
you
have
know
been a
what?
little bit up. I'll wait.
Um, that's okay. The the we gamed before this, and I believe the adrenaline of gaming has allowed us to come to a place of intellectual enlightenment, if you will. So,
Yeah, yeah, no,
or
that
not, maybe not.
maybe not. We'll see the reviews in about a week.
We will. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed this latest episode of the Dylan and Andrew Show.
Come on,
And yeah, you know what? We don't really have a release schedule right now. Maybe we'll figure one out one day.
we
But for
should.
now, we're just putting these episodes out when inspiration strikes. So you know, maybe the next episode is out right now as you're listening to this. Maybe it's not. But either way, we appreciate the support.
Yep.
Um,
Remember to like and subscribe. That
don't do that.
notification.
If you if Dylan telling you to like and subscribe is your prompting to like and subscribe, I don't want it. I want you to like and subscribe of your own volition, okay? You
Yep.
should be prompted into it.
Yep. Don't let anybody force you to do anything.
Yeah, I don't think
You
Dylan's even
are
subscribed to our
common
channel,
speed.
so you know,
Yeah. I don't
I don't think he is. He's probably not.
know.
All right, well, we're gonna sign
Guys,
off. Thanks,
anything. Yeah.
everybody.